Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The desert winds howled as Tiberius stood atop the golden dunes, his cape billowing in the hot breeze. The endless expanse of sand stretched out in all directions, shimmering under the blazing sun. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his broad shoulders. The desert empire was on the brink of collapse, and only one person would emerge victorious from the upcoming election. That person had to be him. Tiberius had spent years building his reputation as a general, a man who commanded respect and wielded power with unmatched precision. He had led his people, the humans of the desert empire, to countless victories against their enemies. But now, the threat came from within. The serpent folk and the lizard folk had grown restless, their centuries-old alliance with humanity beginning to crack under the pressure of resource scarcity and cultural differences. The election was the empire's last hope for peace, a desperate attempt to prevent the outbreak of war. But Tiberius had no intention of sharing power with the other races. His goal was simple: win the election, consolidate his authority, and ensure that humanity remained the dominant force in the empire. The serpent folk were too clever for their own good, always scheming and using their ancient magic to manipulate events from behind the scenes. And the lizard folk, brutes. They had no place in the leadership of the empire. They belonged in the mines, in the labor camps, and anywhere but the halls of power. Tiberius turned away from the desert and strode back toward the encampment where his advisors and soldiers awaited. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the anticipation building among his people. The election was only days away, and every moment counted. The campaign had been fierce, with public debates and speeches turning into battlegrounds for propaganda and manipulation. Tiberius had outmaneuvered Serrat, the serpent folk candidate, at every turn, exposing his rival's reliance on ancient knowledge and sorcery. The humans didn't trust magic, they trusted strength, and Tiberius had plenty of that. Inside the tent, his closest advisors were waiting for him. Marcus, his chief strategist, was poring over a map of the desert. The human territory was marked in red, while the regions controlled by the serpent folk and lizard folk were shaded in green and blue respectively. The lines of division were clear, but what wasn't clear was the outcome of the election. The serpent folk are rallying behind Serrat, Marcus said as Tiberius entered. He's promising them the ancient knowledge that will supposedly bring prosperity to their lands. His speeches are all about peace and wisdom, but I'm telling you, General, he's up to something. I've heard whispers about an artifact hidden deep in the desert. Tiberius frowned. An artifact? Marcus nodded. Something powerful. From what I've gathered, some say it has the ability to alter the course of the election. Others believe it's a weapon that could turn the tide of war if things come to that. Tiberius's mind raced. An artifact that powerful could be a game changer, and if Serrat was searching for it, that meant he was more dangerous than Tiberius had anticipated. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him even more. We can't let Serrat get his hands on it, Tiberius said. If he does, the serpent folk will have an advantage. We need to find this artifact before he does. Marcus tapped the map. We've got scouts out in the desert now, looking for clues. The artifact is said to be hidden somewhere in the deep dunes, where few dare to venture. It's a treacherous region, filled with ancient traps and magic from a time long forgotten. Tiberius clenched his fists. Send more men. We need to be the first to find it. As Marcus gave the orders, Tiberius turned his thoughts to his other rival, Katorak. The lizard folk leader was a warrior through and through, with the loyalty of his people firmly behind him. Katorak's campaign was based on promises of equality and freedom for all races, but Tiberius knew it was little more than a front for revenge. The lizard folk had been oppressed for years, forced into labor while the humans and serpent folk prospered. If Katorak won, there would be bloodshed. Tiberius wasn't about to let that happen. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to see the empire fall into chaos now. The election would be the final battle, one that would decide the future of the Desert Empire, and Tiberius would stop at nothing to ensure his victory. Serot glided silently through the shadowed corridors of the ancient Serpent Temple, his forked tongue flicking in and out as he sensed the faint traces of magic in the air. The temple had been built by his ancestors, long before the current age, and its walls were inscribed with glyphs that spoke of knowledge and power beyond imagining. Serot had spent years studying these glyphs, uncovering secrets that had been lost to time. And now, those secrets were his weapon in the upcoming election. The humans underestimated him, thinking him nothing more than a politician who relied on clever words and old stories. But Serot had plans, and those plans went far beyond mere diplomacy. He had learned of the artifact hidden deep in the desert, a relic that could reshape the balance of power in the empire. With it, he would secure his people's futuria and his own dominion. Serot's pale scales glimmered in the dim light as he made his way to the central chamber of the temple. Here, a massive stone serpent coiled around an altar, its eyes glowing faintly with the remnants of ancient magic. Serot approached the altar, placing a hand on the cold stone. The magic responded to his touch, and he felt a surge of energy course through him. "The time has come," he whispered to himself. "The artifact must be found." For years, Serot had been preparing for this moment. The glyphs had spoken of a great power buried beneath the sands, a power that could be used to control the Empyrean or destroy it. Serot had no intention of letting the humans or the lizard folk find it. The artifact belonged to the serpent folk, and he would use it to ensure that his people would never again be subjugated. But first, he needed to reach the deep dunes. The journey would be treacherous, but Serot had already assembled his most loyal followers to accompany him. Together, they would find the artifact. And once it was in his hands, the election would be irrelevant. The Desert Empire would be his to command. Katorak crouched low in the dust, his scaled hands gripping the hilt of his blade. His yellow eyes narrowed as he surveyed the human outpost ahead. His scouts had reported increased activity around the region, likely due to Tiberius's efforts to secure his hold on the surrounding territories. The humans were moving resources, gathering forces, all in preparation for the election. But Katorak wasn't interested in politics. He had no faith in the election's outcome. It was a sham, a charade designed to keep his people in chains. The lizard folk had been oppressed for far too long. While the humans and serpent folk lived in luxury, his people toiled in the mines, their backs broken under the weight of endless labor. Katorak had fought in the resistance for years, leading raids against human settlements, striking back at their oppressors whenever he could. Now, as the leader of his people, he had a chance to bring about real change. But change would not come through votes and debates. Katorak knew that Tiberius and Serot would never allow a lizard folk to hold real power. They would manipulate the election to their advantage, ensuring that his people remained subjugated. No, the only way to achieve freedom was through force. Katorak stood and signaled to his warriors. They moved with precision, their scaled feet making barely a sound on the desert sands. The outpost was lightly guarded by just a few human soldiers, easily overwhelmed. Katorak's men would strike quickly, take what they needed, and disappear into the night. As they approached the outpost, Katorak's thoughts turned to the artifact. The rumors had spread like wildfire, a powerful relic hidden in the deep dunes, capable of granting untold power to whoever possessed it. Katorak didn't care much for ancient magic, but he knew that if Serot or Tiberius got their hands on the artifact, it could spell doom for his people. If anyone was to find it, it would be him. The lizard folk would not be left at the mercy of the other races. They would fight, and they would win. With a fierce battle cry, Katorak led his warriors into the outpost, cutting through the human guards with ruthless efficiency. The fight was over in moments, and as Katorak stood over the bodies of the fallen, he knew that this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. As the desert winds howled across the empire, each faction prepared for the election in their own way. Tiberius rallied his soldiers, preparing for a political war that could turn into a real one at any moment. Serot gathered his most trusted advisors, setting out into the deep dunes in search of the ancient artifact that could change the course of history. Enchanted, determined to secure his people's freedom, led his warriors on a path of vengeance. In the heart of the desert, the fate of the empire would be decided not by votes, but by power, by steel, and by blood. The desert sun beat down relentlessly as Serot led his small expedition deeper into the dunes, the weight of the ancient knowledge heavy on his mind. His serpent-folk entourage followed in silence, their hoods drawn low to shield themselves from the sun's harsh rays. Serot had spent years studying the hidden texts of his ancestors, piecing together the fragments that would lead him to the artifact. Now, every step brought him closer to fulfilling his destiny and securing the future of the serpent folk. He could feel the artifact's pull, a faint hum in the back of his mind, as if the ancient magic was calling to him, guiding him through the endless sea of sand. Serot's tongue flickered in and out, tasting the air for any signs of danger, but all was still, too still. He glanced back at his followers, their eyes sharp with anticipation. They knew as well as he did that they were not the only ones searching for the artifact. Tiberius's forces would be scouring the desert, and Enchanted, the lizard folk leader, was no doubt plotting his next move. Serot pressed on, his mind racing through the possibilities. The artifact, if it truly existed, would not only grant immense power but also control over the very forces that shaped the desert itself. With it, he could bend the empire to his will, ensure that the serpent folk would never again be marginalized. The humans and lizard folk would be forced to kneel before him. But even as he pushed forward, doubt crept into his thoughts. The ancient texts were vague, filled with cryptic warnings about the artifact's true nature. It was said to be a test of wisdom, strength, and unity. Serot had always prided himself on his intellect, his ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponents. But these a broken bar. This was different. The artifact was not just a tool of power, it was a symbol of the desert's ancient gods, a force beyond comprehension. He shook off the doubts. There was no turning back now. They were too close. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dunes, Serot saw a massive stone structure jutting out from the sands, half buried and worn by time. It was the obelisk, just as the texts had described. His heart quickened. They had found it. Serot motioned for his followers to fan out and secure the area. He approached the obelisk cautiously, the air around it thick with ancient magic. The stone was inscribed with the same glyphs he had studied for years, but here they were more intricate, more powerful. He ran his hand along the surface, feeling the hum of energy beneath his fingertips. The power was real. Before he could delve deeper into the inscriptions, a shout echoed across the dunes. Serot whirled around, his eyes narrowing as figures emerged from the sands. Tiberius's soldiers. The humans had found them, Serot hissed in frustration, signaling to his followers to prepare for battle. The serpent folk moved with deadly precision, their weapons drawn as they formed a defensive line around the obelisk. Tiberius's men advanced, their swords gleaming in the fading light, and within moments, the quiet of the desert was shattered by the clash of steel. Serot watched from the base of the obelisk as the battle unfolded. His mind was torn between the need to defend the artifact and the urge to activate it, to unleash its power and end the conflict once and for all. But he knew he couldn't act hastily. The artifact was dangerous, unpredictable. If he made the wrong move, it could destroy them all. He needed more time. Time to decipher the final glyphs, to understand the true nature of the power he sought to wield. But time was a luxury he didn't have. Tiberius himself emerged from the fray, his massive frame cutting through the serpent folk with brutal efficiency. Serot's eyes met his, and for a moment, the battlefield seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of the serpent and the general, locked in a deadly game of power and ambition. Tiberius raised his sword, his voice booming across the sands. "It's over, Serot," You can't win this fight. Surrender now, and I might spare your people. Serrat's lips curled into a sneer. You think I would surrender to a brute like you? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Tiberius's eyes flicked to the obelisk, recognition dawning in his gaze. That thing won't save you. It's nothing but an old relic. You're wrong, Serrat said, his voice low and dangerous. This artifact holds the power to reshape the Empire, and once I unlock its secrets, you'll be the one begging for mercy. Tiberius's face hardened. Then I'll make sure you never get the chance. With a roar, Tiberius charged, his sword aimed directly at Serrat. The serpent folk leader dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, but Tiberius was relentless. He swung again and again, forcing Serrat back toward the obelisk. Serrat's mind raced. He couldn't defeat Tiberius in hand-to-hand combat. The human was too strong, too skilled. But he didn't need to. All he had to do was reach the obelisk. With a quick, fluid motion, Serrat slipped past Tiberius's next strike and placed his hand on the obelisk. The glyphs flared to life, glowing with an eerie, ancient light. Serrat could feel the power surging through him, more immense than he had ever imagined. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. But something was wrong. The power was too much, too wild. It wasn't bending to his will, it was consuming him. Serrat's eyes widened in panic as the obelisk's light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and a deafening roar filled the air as the magic within the obelisk surged out in a wave of energy. Tiberius stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the light. What have you done? He shouted. Serrat tried to pull away from the obelisk, but it was too late. The magic had him in its grip, and he could feel it tearing through him, burning away his flesh and bone. He screamed, a sound filled with both agony and terror, as the power consumed him whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Serrat was gone. Tiberius stared at the smoldering remains of the obelisk, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. The artifact's power had been unleashed, but instead of granting Serrat the control he sought, it had destroyed him. Whatever secrets the obelisk held, they had died with the serpent folk leader. But there was no time to dwell on it. Tiberius knew the battle wasn't over yet. From the edge of the dunes, Katorak and his lizard folk warriors emerged, their weapons gleaming in the fading sunlight. They had arrived just in time to witness Serrat's demise, and now they were ready to claim the artifact or what was left of Ida for themselves. Tiberius cursed under his breath. The lizard folk had been waiting for their moment, and now they were making their move. The final battle for the Desert Empire had begun. Katorak's heart pounded in his chest as he led his warriors into the fray. The humans and serpent folk had weakened each other in their struggle for the artifact, and now it was his turn to strike. He had waited for this moment, bided his time as the others fought over scraps, and now the prize was within his grasp. The obelisk stood before him, still smoldering from the magic that had consumed Serrat. Katorak didn't care about the artifact's power. All that mattered was the Empire, and the freedom of his people. With a fierce cry, Katorak charged toward Tiberius, his blade raised high. The human general turned to face him, his eyes cold and calculating. Tiberius had always been a formidable opponent, but Katorak was driven by something far stronger than ambition. He was fighting for the future of his people. The two leaders clashed, their swords ringing out in the desert air. Katorak's strength matched Tiberius's brute force, and for a moment, it seemed as though the battle could go either way. But Katorak had the advantage of rage on his side, and he pressed the attack with relentless fury. Tiberius grunted as he parried Katorak's blows, his movements slowing under the weight of the battle. You're a fool, Katorak, he spat. You think you can win this? The Empire will never be yours. Katorak snarled, his eyes blazing with anger. This isn't about winning, human. This is about justice. My people will be free, no matter the cost. Tiberius's grip on his sword faltered for just a moment, and that was all Katorak needed. With a swift, powerful strike. He knocked the blade from Tiberius's hand and sent the general sprawling to the ground. Cottorak stood over him, his sword poised to deliver the final blow. "This is the end, Tiberius." But before he could strike, the ground beneath them rumbled, and a low, ominous sound filled the air. Both leaders froze, their eyes locked on the obelisk as it began to crack and splinter. The power within it had not been extinguished, it had merely been contained, and now it was breaking free. Tiberius struggled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here." Now, Cottorak hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to finish the fight, to end Tiberius once and for all. But as the ground shook violently beneath them, he realized that the battle no longer mattered. The artifact's power was too great. It would destroy them all if they didn't flee. Without another word, Cottorak turned and ran, Tiberius following close behind as the desert erupted into chaos.